Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. Today on the podcast, I'm speaking with Estelle Thomson, who has been an inspiration for me for many years. We've met on Instagram as part of a yearly event called May We All Heal, which I started in 2015 and gave grieving mothers a creative outlet and an avenue to share with others. Estelle has a way of using art and yoga in her healing journey that drew me in, and it was such an honor for me to be speaking with her. Here is someone who can laugh while crying, who exemplifies living with the paradox of living a creative life while holding the gift of what death has brought her. She says,
in a lot of things I do, I was like, oh my God, I wouldn't be doing this if Tommy hadn't passed away. I kept saying, okay, this was given to me. It was like, this was written in the stars. That's gonna happen to me in my life. So it's like my karma, how can I make it my life's work, and that was a big piece of the puzzle. And okay, so this happened to me. I can either deny it, or I can make art out of it, and I can make beautiful shapes of my body out of it.
About this week's guest. Estelle Thomson has a Master of Arts in Counselling Psychology and is a leading yoga teacher and educator in the intersecting fields of expressive arts, embodied movement, and psychology. With over 10 years of experience, her work explores the relationship between breath, body, emotions, imagination, and play. Estelle is a faculty member of Quantum University, internationally recognized for offering online courses and graduate degree programs in holistic, alternative, natural, and integrative medicine. Estelle leads numerous lectures, workshops, retreats locally and internationally. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Did you know that How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded and produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich? Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. So welcome, Estelle. It's so nice to finally meet you and to have you as a guest on the podcast. How are you today?
So nice to be here and finally talk to you in live voice. Today I'm good. I'm tender. I think I'm tender today. But I'm just so delighted to be with you in your presence. So thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is really mine. And just for those people listening, as I'm speaking to Estelle, I'm looking into her art studio office, and if you haven't, please go and check out Estelle on Instagram, because this is how I met her and this is how she's inspiring me on a daily basis. When we started, I actually thought, how is it possible that I'm allowed to speak to Estelle, because she's a real creative inspiration for me. So I'm really looking forward to speaking with you today.
Oh, the same. Thanks so much for saying that. I put a lot of intention in what I, put out on social media, and I figure if it moves me, it will maybe move one more person.
Definitely.
And then that's kind of how I go about sharing. Yeah.
And so you've also been an inspiration to me in how you have dealt with your grief and your trauma in your life. Mm-hmm. Why don't we start off by telling the people listening a little bit about your life and how you met grief and trauma?
Yeah, and that's actually how we met as well on Instagram. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a visual artist, and I have two sons. And I had Isaiah, which was my firstborn, and then very shortly after, I got pregnant again with my son Tommy, and Tommy was born premature. So he was born at 26 weeks of gestation. And to give you an idea, a full-term pregnancy is about 38 weeks. So he was really, really premature. And then that in itself, and his birth was an initiation. I feel sometimes that my really journey started at his birth, not at his death, because that was a descent in itself, kind of a breaking the veil of my reality and what I thought I could control. And my son were really, they were only 8 months apart.
Wow.
And now that I think about it, that in itself was so crazy. I remember, Natalie, I was at the hospital and I had the crash C-section, and all the nurses and doctors were around me, and my husband was holding our baby, which was like 8.5 months old. And everybody was like, whose baby is that? Because I had just had the baby. And we're like, that's our son. So they were supposed to be Irish twins. They were supposed to be, 13 months apart. But because Tommy was born so premature, then they were 8 months apart, which, so then, we spent about 3.5 months, almost 4 months in NICU. And that was the wild, wild west of NICU. And, it was a journey of really being an advocate for my child. It was a journey of identity for me and standing up for like him, which taught me so much about being difficult, and that was okay. And then he went out of NICU, and after that, it was kind of on and off at the hospital. Like we spent a lot of time there still, even though he was at home. And then by his second year of life, Tommy was really thriving. Like we knew he had cerebral palsy, but it was stage 1. So he was going to walk, he was going to talk, so we kind of were starting to have these big dreams for him, because he had been so sick in NICU. Like he had so much, and like everything a preemie could have, he had. And then when he was 2.5 years old, he passed away like unexpectedly from, really, he had a surgery, and it was a complication from a surgery he had. So it's kind of like the medicine, the surgery that kind of saved him also, it was a complication, and he had a seizure, and he passed away. And that was really unexpected, because at this point we thought like he was fine, he was out of the loop, and he was the worst was yet to come, or the worst had passed, to say. And then, and so that was September 8th, 2015. So, I'm 7 years out now, 8 years, I guess. Am I making the math right? I think so. And, it's been an unfolding, and we were speaking off mic. It's been a revelation, I guess, it's been what a ride, it's been, and also an identity crisis in a way, for me and my family, and what we've been through. Anyways, that's the long story short, I guess, or the short story long. And I think we met really early on, Natalie, like I think really early on, because you were sharing, you had, I think, May We All Heal. Exactly. I remember that. Yeah. And I would post under that hashtag.
Okay, that was the start. Yeah, because the Grieving Parents Support Network came on in 2014, and then the 2015 was the first year that we did May We All Heal. So in May 2015 was the first year that we did May We All Heal, and then as a yearly event. And for those people listening, this is a yearly healing event, a creative healing event in the month of May for people experiencing loss, but in the early days it was specifically for grieving parents. It has broadened a little bit. So, the things that come to mind or come to heart when I listen to you telling the story of you and Tommy, first of all, the traumatic loss in the sense of the unexpectedness. Like, the beginning of his life was challenging, and there's a 26-week baby in the NICU. My daughters were born at 34 weeks, and they were like around 2 kilo and a bit less. I don't know how much that is in the US weight scales, but so that's already really small, and skinny arms and legs. But so then you go through all that NICU phase, which is intense, to come out of the place where you think, okay, the worst is over, and then something like that happens. So that's on the one thing. And then you use this word revelation. And I'm really interested as to both on, like, how did you deal with your grief and loss early on? And then also, what did grief, or what does grief still reveal to you?
There's so much wonder in grief. Now I can see it. I couldn't see it at the beginning, of course. And I felt really, really betrayed. I think once the shock wore off, I felt really betrayed by life because I didn't want it to be my life. I was really stuck on the idea that like, I was going to be a yoga teacher and I was going to have two boys and I was going to live happy and married. And that was that. And, that pretty life got completely broken. And because I was already doing soul work, like I felt I was already like, that's what broke me the most, like I have a master's in counseling psychology. Like I was doing a gratitude practice. Like I was, all about positive psychology. And I was like, doing my affirmation. And I was like, and then I was like, I don't know if we can swear on your word, on your thing, but I was like, fuck this. I was like, what is, like, I was like, almost universe, like, look, I was being a good girl and this is what you give me. I didn't want this. And I was being given something that I didn't want. And really, really early on, I still remember this, like, I think it took me a month for the shock to wear off. And, at first, like a lot of people are in the house, everybody's giving you food, da, 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 da. And then everybody left. And then it's like, my firstborn was at daycare. My husband was back at work. Everybody's gone. Nobody's giving you food anymore. And I was alone in my living room. And I was like on my knees. And I was like, okay, so I have to carry this like my whole life. And that was the tragedy. I was like, I was going to have to carry this my whole life. Like this is a lifetime of grieving him. That felt so clear to me right from the beginning. This is a pain I will have to have. So how can I do this with grace? And how can life be revealed to me? Like, what can it teach me? And it required like such an openness and, like finally me not wanting to control the yoga, but letting the yoga like work through me. And by yoga, I mean life, or I don't know, my connection to all the realms of me, the physical realms of me, the psychological realms of me, the spiritual realms of me. So it was such a beautiful moment, like by myself being like, okay. And then I kind of bounced into artistic action. That's how I was like, okay, like I know what to do. I trained myself for this. And like, rolled out my yoga mat. And even in shock, I remember because I was doing yoga every day already, and because I was painting every day, like it's almost like my survival system knew what to do, like automatically. Does that make sense when I talk like that? So
yeah.
I remember like even the next day, like Tommy passed away, the next day I was like at a studio doing yoga. Like I was still in shock. And I literally, like, you would have looked at me, I probably looked like a ghost, but I knew what to do. Like for me, art and yoga, like saved my life, and I don't say that in a light term. Like for me, art is survival, for me, like my movement practice is my survival. Like why I move my body is literally to survive now. 10, like before Tommy, it was like to lose weight. And now, like literally like so superficial, and now it's literally like about survival. So it was like, okay, how, and I felt grief. And nobody talks about this, how I always thought grief was like sad and heavy and just like really stuck, which like are all these things, right? Like we go through like these cycles. But I felt grief such in a wild way. Like I felt unleashed. Like I felt like when I really felt my grief, I felt this like cave woman like coming out of, I just wanted to be on my hands and knees and like roll around on the ground. And so I felt this grief energy was so alive, which was everything opposite of what I had read and what I had thought. So it was like, I'm so glad I kept like such a curious eye on grief instead of like judging myself for like wanting to be just wild about it. Anyways, I hope I'm not going like all about the places, but like I was definitely in shock, at the beginning. And then the other thing that happened was I started writing, and I mean, that's how we found each other on Instagram. And then there was this other lady, I forget her name now, but she is in New Zealand, I believe. And her hashtag was capture your grief. And she had this like month. It was like maybe a challenge when challenges were like popular on Instagram. And it was like just a prompt. And she had lost a baby as well. And it was like a prompt and like post anything you want. Like it could be a picture. It didn't have to be like an essay or anything. But I found that just really useful. And so every day I would be like posting a picture or a quote or something that was going through me. And I wasn't even like, there was no why behind it, like so much of what I do now has a why and an intention behind it. But I remember like, this was like, I just needed to make way for what wanted to make way. And one of the things that helped me was like, just writing it down. And that's how the Grief Project started, really. And Natalie, I swear it took me literally a year to realize like people were reading this. And and now now it's been many years, but I've accumulated maybe like 500 essays on, I literally studied death, by just writing about my own experience and what I was going through, and also what helped me, which is just and what helped me. So, and in terms of like, this revelation, I mean, grief is still teaching me, so much. Like this week we had in our community a boy who was my first son's age passed away of cancer, and an 11-year-old, and all I can think about is like the parents, and just like just to think about what they're going through. And so it just like brings you back, to what you went through. And so grief is teaching me all the time. And I love that, I know I'm crying now, but like, I love that, how we get to feel so much as humans. And witnessing ourselves through that, So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your authenticity as well and sharing that. Because, when I listen to you, I see this point where now, having spoken to so many people, both clients and podcast guests, is that there comes a point in time where maybe there's more than two ways, but it seems like there is like a decision, like a fork in the road that comes. Yes. And there's some people who, I get goosebumps when I share that. I can really sense that there's something potent in there. But it's like when you were talking about, I was on my living room floor and I said to myself, I have to carry this for the whole life. I have to grieve this for the whole life. So how can I make this? You used the word in there, which I can't remember now. But how can I make something out of it? How can I carry this gracefully? Maybe you said something like that. But then there are those who see grief as a tormentor or as a weight, or for whatever reason they can't see or they can't open themselves to the gift of grief. And I think it's fascinating because, it's not because they don't want to, but it's because it's maybe not possible for them. So I think it's fascinating to see, to have people tell me their story about their resilience. And I'm like, how to go back to the point where this fork of the road comes, and how do these people go this route down that you describe? And I think, what you were saying before about, I was doing all the right things about positive psychology. I did my yoga practice, my meditation and so forth. But it's not that life doesn't happen. And with life, I mean all the challenges, and life concludes with death. So it's the whole thing. We just always talk about life, but actually death is part of that. And so I think your practice that you described is a way to say, well, okay, well, this is my preparation for the hard days. This is not to prevent hard days, but this is my practice. And then when something happens, my practice, my body knows what to do. So, I mean, the way you described it, it really sounded like your body knew it needed to move, it needed to go where grief took you. And even you were in shock, you were still moving, at least to some degree, to the abilities of your personal resilience.
Yeah, 100%, and my body knew what to do in that moment. And it saved my life, it saved my life, because the pain, as you know, was not just physical, but it was a psychic pain. Like all these connections were like, had nowhere to go. And, how do I carry this so that I don't become bitter and I don't want to hurt other people, and that it's really interesting because I also teach prenatal yoga and mom and baby yoga, like parent yoga, baby yoga. And, it took me and this is my expertise, like this is what I do like for a living. And I was like, oh, how interesting. Like, so when I went back to teach, it was so hard. Like, it was so hard to see like pregnant women whining about being pregnant. I was like, why are you whining? You have a baby in your belly, and of course, like I wouldn't, but I saw how I was like, no, this is me hurting. That has nothing to do with them. They can whine all they want. This is about me. This is not about them. Or just like, being exposed to other babies. And I think when we keep ourselves open and exposed to just being curious about what's going on in our own processes, then, that part of my job has been so healing. It's been so healing. Now I can see Tommy and all the babies I teach every week, and I'm so blessed to be around pregnant women. It brings me back. I feel so great to be close to this, because I never lose. It keeps my grief. I like to say that it keeps my grief warm. I love that it keeps me close to what I lost. And because of this, I feel more life inside. Like I feel alive from the inside, and yeah. And I think there is a decision, there is a conscious decision that and for me, it was like a month out, but I've had students, like it took them 5 years, to really like accept the reality, like accept the stillborn birth, accept the divorce, like, and truly like embrace. And yeah, all of this, like I'm just so grateful about just all these regulatory tools that were already ingrained like in me, and then to let them change and let them evolve through what was going through, and yeah, even with my writing, like I wasn't a writer, but to be like, just the simple fact, this is making me feel good. So I'm just going to keep writing. And also I was realizing, like, every time I was doing something that I love, it was like I was meeting Tommy there. Like, I don't know, I just felt his presence. Like, not that, like, that's, he wanted me to be happy, blah, blah, blah. Not that, but like, literally, like, he was working through me. Like, a lot of times I've felt like, in a lot of things I do, I was like, oh my God, I wouldn't be doing this if like Tommy hadn't passed away. Like, I think he's like part. So like to go back to like, I kept saying, okay, this was given to me. It was like, this was written in the stars. That's like going to happen to me, like in my life, So it's like my karma, how can I make it my life's work, And that was a big piece of like the puzzle. And like, okay, so this happened to me. I can either like deny it and like forget about it, or I can make art out of it, and I can make like beautiful shapes of my body out of it. And I can, do you know what I mean? Like how I can make it literally my dharma, like my greater life's purpose, because that's been given to me. And like I didn't want it either, but it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, it's been given to me. So what you gonna do? Like,
Yeah.
But anyways, I digress a little bit. But
No. You're beautiful the way you pick up all these pieces. And the thing that sort of stayed with me from what you were saying was that there were two things actually. One was where also there's like a decision that people make as to, does this happen to me or for me? Mm-hmm. And, when you say, well, these babies that I see out there, these grief activation, or these moments or times when we meet people and something in us vibrates in grief, does this happen because of what they're doing or because of my pain? And literally it is because there's pain in me. And it's nothing to do with the mother who's carrying a baby and who might be challenged in her pregnancy. But I think there is the difference between, is this grief happening to me, or is life doing something to me or for me? And, we have this, I think it's a wrong belief that if I'm good, then good things will happen. It's not a wrong belief, but it's a mistaken assumption that if I do good,
yes,
I'm going to be receiving good.
And since Tommy has passed away, a lot of other awful things have happened to me. Like, life doesn't stop then. It's like, okay, well, I guess I've lived through the worst of it all. Like, it's like a continual like thing. And yeah, and it's still teaching me and triggering me and to be like, yeah, to be open to that, and all it's like, yeah, in all its mysterious and funky ways that grief can, show up in our lives. Yeah. And now, now it's taken time, but now I'm great. Like, I'm grateful for my grief. I'm grateful for Tommy. Like, of course I would want him back in a second, but also I'm just so much, I've expanded so much, it's not like the pain is smaller, but it's like energetically I'm larger, and I can hold so much more. And yeah, again, that was like, okay, like that was my life's contract, and okay, let's go for the ride. Like, let's go for the ride. And I love this idea of the crossroads. Like, I think there's many crossroads, like as you unfold and evolve. And, a big piece of me that I was so surprised was like the identity piece, like this transformation from being like a mom of two boys to a mom of like one boy, and like how all these things, like I put like some kind of like I thought I was better because I had like two kids. And so when I lost one, I was like, I'm lesser of a mom, and it was such an identity crisis for me to be like, wait a minute, like, this is what I think. Like, it was like really like facing a lot of shadow stuff that were like, no, it doesn't make me less of a mom, like, and to claim that for myself. So that there was a lot. And again, like I said, like, I think that piece, that identity piece, that maturity really started when Tommy was born, because I had to voice a lot of things, not just at the hospital, but like I had to become this like lioness for him, and he was my little cub. And, I had to, there was like a sense of protection, and I had never done that for myself. So my kids were teaching, my kids were teaching how to do this through them, but just how much, like, sometimes I think like both my kids, like, to be like, okay, who's teaching who here? Who's teaching who? So
So one of the things you said, which I also want to pick up, is you said, I think movement and art or writing, or two of them, said saved my life. So some of the people listening might say, well, I can't paint, or I can't write, or I'm not a yoga person. But I think, like you, I think there's an importance in expression, in creativity. I think there's so much potential. But if we're thinking about someone who says, okay, I might give it a try because Estelle describes it really fantastic and it saved her life, what would you recommend to someone? What resource or insight would you recommend to them to start with if they're not a painter and they're not a writer?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, to quote the great Elizabeth Gilbert, if you're breathing, if you're alive, you are a creative person. And this could concur with being a quote unquote yogi or yogini. You know, yoga really is about, like, a big part of it is your breath, and just to literally to know you are breathing, to know you are alive. And it's so poetic, yoga. It's like when you know your breath, you're like, oh, the breath of me is like my life. My breath is like my life. It's the love of me. It's the attention of me. And so we are all artists. We're all makers of beautiful things, and for me, this shows up through, colors and paintings and the marks I make and the movement. But we all have our own way. Like some of my students, they're like gardeners, or they cook, or like, think of anything you do with your hands, or there's so much, like, creativity is just the way you engage with the world. And like, how do you do that, like, in a way that's like uninhibited? So there's a lot of like, almost like, inner child work when we start to explore like our creativity, and that's why it feels very, very vulnerable. Like, creativity, to use a word that we've used a lot today, it's revealing ourselves, right? It's like our insides, like, now they're outside. So it's like, it's so vulnerable, and so what I would tell somebody who doesn't think they're like creative, I would say, make a mark. Can you make a mark on a piece of paper? Oh my God, you're creative. Like, have you gotten dressed this morning? Like, you mean you were naked and like you put on some clothes? Oh my goodness, you are a creative person. So it's to widen our lens on what makes us, creative, and on what makes us, like, we think, this is incredible to me. We think that movement and creativity and breathing, it's outside of us. It's not outside of us. It's an instinct to breathe. It's an instinct to want to move. It's an instinct to create. It's literally like our birthright to actually like take an in breath and an out breath. The act of breathing is a creative act. Like, we are walking, living, breathing inspiration. And we just forget. I get really passionate about this because, like, we forget we're like walking inspirations. We're literally like walking, we're breathing. So like, we're inspiration. So how can we remember? And so for me, it's been so natural to merge art and yoga together. They're really one and the same, And so and so it's to come back to, like, the yoga lets you just pause and come to yourself as like a deep homecoming, and when you really like slow down and pause. This is really hard to do, right? Even for like a minute, because that's when everything comes to you, right?
Yeah.
Like this morning when I was reading that little 11-year-old obituary, like, I just took a minute and I was like, I took a minute because it's to let me feel. We don't do life, we feel life. And the only way to feel is to literally like stop, to just pause, and notice ourselves like breathing and living. So, I know it requires a lot of unlearning, a lot of unlearning when it comes to, again, like whether it be yoga or art, but like I tell you, the expressive arts and, just even now, like somatics, like shaking and dancing and just like rocking, they're so underlooked when it comes to grief relief. Like so when Tommy first died, everybody was giving me sleeping pills and everybody was like, we're trying to like tame me down and stuff. And I was like, I didn't want to be tamed down. I needed to feel this. I needed to be with the intensity. And so again, how can I make way for what wants to make way? And for me, Estelle, personally, it's been through writing. It's been through making mark on paintings. It's been through watercolors and symbols and stories. And, poetry has been so much more helpful than going to therapy. But like, that's for me.
Yeah.
Somebody else, like therapy might work wonders for them, And so, and I think this comes to a point, it's like, there's no right or wrong way to live your grief, and that's been, so those have been my way, and you can try them, and please try them because they've helped me, they might help you. But my husband, we had totally different way to live the death of our child. When Tommy first passed away, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I wanted to move. Actually, like I wanted to move, get out of my house, move to another country. I wanted to like literally like escape. And he was the complete opposite. He was on the phone talking to his friends, and he would be like checking Facebook. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, no, it feels really good. Do you want to talk to them? And I'd be like, no. But then, and then he's a big surfer. So he'll go surfing. He doesn't really talk about it, but, he has his own way to release, he'll be doing yard work for like 4 or 5 hours outside. And I know he's like, he built a boat in our garage. It took him 8.5 years. Do you think that was not his grief project? I think that he called it a radio flyer. And that was the little train, the little wagon we used to take our boys in. So we have, and I really value this, Natalie, how we've respected each other and how we've both dealt with this in our own way, because it really did not look the same, like he wasn't out doing I've painted so many flowers, obsessed with flowers. My grief for me was coming out in flowers. How about that? It's coming out in flowers. What can I say? Like, will my husband paint flowers? Like, no.
Yeah.
But will he go on a camping trip and do some like mountain biking until he's blue in the face? Yes. So we all have our different ways. I think that's really important to know, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And I hope if anybody watches this, like, if you have something to say, like, write it down. And sometimes it's hard because like there's this expression, like, there's no words, when somebody passes away, like there are no words. Well, I think there are words, maybe not from the beginning, but then, so that's why art has helped me so much, because art is nonsensical.
Yeah.
Art has no words. And like sometimes literally making marks, like I'm telling you, and writing is making marks. But like, if you write, like if you know the alphabet, like you're an artist, again, it's like widening our lens on what we think is creative, what we think is moving our bodies, what we think,
And reflecting back from what you were saying, looking at my years, I can see that my creativity has taken on all kinds of different forms and shapes. One of them quite at the beginning, after my mother died, I also needed to walk, and I walked the creek in the back of our house, and it's called, it's like a creek which has like a golden river through it. And I would imagine that the water would run through me and take out all the anger that I had at that time, or would wash away all those things. And I just basically did that every day for a long time. On the other hand, I, at the beginning, didn't do much writing or creativity otherwise, but I think it's not the point of the expectation that are underlying also art or creativity. There's always like, it doesn't look nice, or I don't like it, but it's because there's expectation of how it should be or what it should look like or feel like. But I think it's letting go of that. And I like the start by making a mark, by just taking something that fills your heart. For example, for me, one year I planted lavender for my daughter. This was my thing. And I did that in the rain. It was like a real exercise kind of thing. But this was just me making a mark, like celebrating something. Or another year for her birthday and anniversary of death, I made a little clip, a little film. I mean, nowadays there's so many different options that people can use or dabble in, whether that is the iPad and Procreate or whatever. There's very different ways if someone is shy of a brush.
And not, to not question it. Like, that's something I've been like looking back, to not question the thing that you're like, why do I want to go bungee jumping right now? Like, what, to not question that, because it's like, once we start, it's our own judgment really that like stops us from like, I don't know, like messing up or like, again, making your mark. Like, I love all those examples because we all have our way to process and unfold and, let our grief like reveal itself to us, I love that. I love all these examples.
I actually want to come to your retreats now that we've spoken.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to share those links in the show notes for anyone listening. So I can, first of all, just really recommend being inspired by Estelle for so many years to go and visit her Instagram. Well, thank you so much, Estelle. It's been...
Thank you. And I also like, have you watched the documentary? So if you go on my website, estellethomson.com, after 4 or 5 years of making all my grief essays, here in Canada, it's called the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I collaborated with them, and we did a 30-minute documentary of kind of my journey through love and loss. So anybody like listening to this podcast and just want to know a bit more of my journey, I think the documentary, and it's visual.
It's beautiful.
It's my writing, and I wrote. There's me. I wrote the script, everything. So, and now that documentary is being watched in like social work school and nursing schools and in psychology offices. Like, so it's. I think it can kind of see a bit more what I mean in terms of how breath and movement and creativity really help and still to this day support my journey in grief, ever evolving, right? Because it's always moving and changing and evolving. Yeah.
So we're going to put that link there as well. I remember that documentary. It was really beautiful. Another part of in the inspiration of Estelle.
Aww.
Shall we go into rapid fire questions?
Okay, yes.
All right. So these are just a couple of sentences that I start and you finish. So let's see. Grieving and trauma means?
Feeling all your feelings.
And healing means?
Cycles.
And what I have learned about myself in the light of loss and trauma?
That I'm a badass warrior goddess of this earth.
And one thing I wish people knew about loss and trauma?
That it makes you feel alive if you really feel it. If you really allow yourself to experience it and breathe with it. And it's the greatest permission of your life, I think. And also that you don't need to, grieving doesn't just mean losing someone. It's so wide, and so alive. I think there's such a big misunderstanding about grief. Yeah. I think it makes you feel so alive if you really do feel it. So
What you just said reminded me of a conversation I recently had with someone about the word "I'm broken." And the picture was, in order to be experiencing and living more and feeling more and expressing or experiencing more, the container needed to be broken to be allowed to be encompassing more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for Tommy, because then I get to live with a broken heart all my life, and that makes me open and receptive and empathetic and compassionate. And yeah, I'm proud of my broken heart. And also like that I'm still whole even though I'm broken. It doesn't make me not whole, it doesn't. So it actually makes me invincible,
And the last question is one specific thing that has changed since my loss and trauma that I wouldn't want to miss.
I hope I'm answering this right, but I don't think I would be like traveling the world if Tommy would still be here. Since his loss, I went to India, I went to Australia, I went like all around the world, and traveling for me has become a bit of has opened my conscious to so much of the world, and I'm grateful for that. So I hope I answered it right.
Everything's right. Whatever it has brought. Like in my case, I would say it wasn't on my bucket list to write so many books, as an example. I mean, I was writing articles for my professional expertise, but it wasn't on my list to write a book. And just like you were saying, there's things that happen as a way to give space or to create something from that. And for me, there's other things that happened, like for me, standing in front of a camera for a live interview on national television. This is not me. This is really not me. But this was called for. And the greater purpose of allowing someone to see the light, which they can't see otherwise, that makes it all worth.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would become someone that spoke publicly about grief, ever, or make a documentary, or like ever. Again, I was just going to be a yoga teacher and be married and live my life. And this has opened me and cracked me open in all great ways, deepen my life, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much, Estelle. It's been such a pleasure to have the time with you, for you to give me that time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.